vanavond weer een speciale uitzending met een gast uit Australië. Welcome, Craig.
Yeah, great to be with you again.
Yes, it is a pleasure and an honor. Our favorite politician from Australia. Well, there's not much to choose from at the moment.
I don't think so. Not at the moment, certainly not at the moment.
So for the people who have not seen you in action, I think it's almost impossible if you have been paying attention. Can you very briefly introduce yourself up until the corona crisis?
Certainly. I was a member of the government, which was the, we call it the Liberal Party down here, which is the equivalent of the Conservatives in the UK. I was a member of that government. So the Conservatives in the UK, the Republicans in the US, similar sort of, very similar structure, very similar platforms. But I just saw what the party that I was a member of doing at the coronavirus and the COVID, and so many things that I thought were totally against my beliefs, especially my beliefs in individual freedom and human rights and civil liberties that were being violated. So I felt that I had no option than to leave the government, to walk away and go to what basically become an independent member of parliament. Since then, what's happened in our country is I no longer recognise the Australia that I grew up in. So I'm determined to make a change. So I've worked with one of Australia's leading businessmen, who's behind the United Australia Party. And we are going to run under the United Australia Party at the next election. And we're going to take on the two major parties, which are the Liberal Party and the Labor Party. So very similar to in the UK, where you've got the Labor Party and the Conservatives, and a third force comes up. We're doing exactly the same thing down here in Australia. We've got the Liberal Party and the Labor Party, and we're going to take them head on at the next election. And we're going to run basically a platform of restoring Australians' freedoms. Because our freedoms have been taken away, I think, like nowhere else in the world.
Yes, the messages and the news we get, not via the normal channels, but via the new media, are very alarming, I must say. And speaking of about that skew in news coverage, you have been censored a lot, which is an outrage, of course, as you are a member of parliament. Parliament stands for talking. Sure. So suppressing free speech in parliament is one of the worst crimes against democracy.
I know. We still there? Yeah, still there. Sorry. Yeah. Look, what surprised me, I've been censored off Facebook. Facebook defamed me, and I'm currently taking legal action against Facebook for the defamation when they shut my page down. My page was getting over 1 million interactions every month. That's not 1 million views. It was many more than that. It was 1 million people liking, sharing, or commenting on my page every month. And Facebook simply didn't like the message that I said and censored, took it all down, destroyed it. And that's still gone. But that concerned me. But what really concerned me was the speech that I gave in our federal Australian Parliament. Now, and we're part of the Westminster system, the British system, and the rights to speak freely in Parliament go back to the Bill of Rights of 1688. And that actually Bill of Rights of 1688, which was, of course, in English, that was before Australia was even settled, before the British were even here. That Bill of Rights basically says that, and it forms part of Australian law, that what you say in Parliament cannot be questioned or impeached outside of that Parliament. So it's not up to some third party to censor your speech. And yet a speech that I gave and put up on YouTube, YouTube decided they didn't like what I said in Parliament and censored it and took it down. I just thought this was actually outrageous conduct. And what also disappointed me, there are civil penalties for a breach of parliamentary privilege. Unfortunately, the other members of Parliament just stood by and dusted their hands of it and said, well, we really don't care. We didn't like what you say anyway, and we're happy that you were censored. It was just, what happened to the old expression, I may not agree with what you say, but I defend to my death your right to say it. And if you can't say things in a federal parliament without being censored, it just shows the very, very dark times that we live in at the moment.
It's very similar in Holland. Unfortunately, we have multiple parties now fighting against what I call a coup, but they have similar problems. Their speeches in parliament are taken down of YouTube, of Facebook, of Instagram. It is outrageous. Yesterday, we had our own court case against Facebook. I studied as a pharmacist, so I tried to elaborate on the details of the injections and of the virus, which keeps getting taken down. And with that, I think misinformation can hurt, but censorship can hurt at least as much.
Right. Really, even when it comes to, even if your opinion is wrong, by expressing it and other people arguing against it and showing it as wrong, everyone gets a greater perspective of the truth. So we shouldn't, we want to hear the best way to defeat a bad idea is not to censor it and brush it under the carpet, is to bring it out in the open and defeat it with good ideas. But where you have someone that is the arbiter of truth, especially what we have, remember, these companies are Facebook, and these are all American-controlled companies. So what we have basically, for us, it's foreign interference, and it's the same for you there. It's foreign interference in your political system.
Absolutely.
We have, imagine if it was the reverse situation around. Could you imagine them screaming in America how there was foreign interference in their elections and how that would be like, absolutely taboo? But here we have a large American tech giant deciding what Australians can hear from their parliament and the lead up to election. This has to be called out. It has to be stopped, because otherwise, how can you have a fair and free election if you've got foreign tech giants favouring one side and blocking the other side what they have to say?
Absolutely, and it's very clear. This is also a debate in the US itself. The investment of Facebook of $500 million in the previous 2020 elections. But you also were censored inside the parliament by your own fellow colleagues.
That's right. I was trying to give a speech on the subject of the matter of the debate was Australian innovation during COVID. Now we have some very good scientists that we should get behind, and researchers. And it was an Australian researcher at one of our universities that first discovered that COVID can be killed stone cold dead by ivermectin in a test tube. Now there's a long way from going from a test tube to out, but that was an Australian invention. And then we have one of our Australian professors, Professor Thomas Barodi, a world-renowned professor that has made many important discoveries in his career, that came up with what he called the triple therapy, which was the idea that you would combine ivermectin with zinc and with an antibiotic, which he used doxycycline. And that is exactly what they were using in India. That is what places in Uttar Pradesh have used. And if you look at how successful they have been compared to places like in the UK and here in Australia, it's just amazing. Now, I was just trying to make those notes about how we let this could have been known as the Australian cure, the Australian treatment, and we could have helped save the world. But anyhow, I was shut down and censored. The person that was the acting speaker and one of the other members of parliament there for the opposition were just determined to interrupt and use parliamentary tactics to stop me from speaking, because when you stand up and you interfere, that takes away the person speaking time. So it was just outrageous, the censorship that's being on. And these people just don't want to debate.
Exactly. It's not even an honest.
Their idea is we are right and you must be silent. And we're not gonna even entertain your ideas or debate with you. And the reason they don't want to debate is they know when the facts are put on the table, they'd be slaughtered.
Absolutely. And they also use these interruptions to sabotage your speech. As you said,
yes, of course.
It takes away your speaking time. We have the same thing in our parliament and in our courts. So let's go over it a little bit. Australia, you already mentioned it, is one of the hardest hit or the harshest lockdowns. How did this happen?
That's a good. Firstly, the city of Melbourne has been locked down longer than anywhere else in the world. It holds the #1 prize for the most lockdown city in the world. That's the city of Melbourne. Sydney's not much better. Look, I think one of the problem was that we were actually a bit lucky when it came to COVID originally. Firstly, we're an island nation, so it's very easy for us to control our borders. We were quick to close our borders down and cut off flights from China and people travelling from China. So as an island nation, you have that great advantage. Secondly, when the first COVID outbreak came, we were in the middle of our summer, and we've seen there tends to be a seasonal fluctuation in COVID, especially for the Alpha variant. So we were very lucky. So while all the northern hemisphere, all the Europe and the US and of course China was experiencing their winter time and they're having a real hard run with COVID, we were basically isolated down in Australia in the middle of our summertime. So we had you could say we're very successful at keeping COVID out. But the problem that is caused because people now think they can keep it out forever. Of course, you can't do that. So you've got a lot of politicians that have been able to, I think that they can become popular by being the harshest they can lock people down and saying, we are keeping you safe. And because there has been so much propaganda and such a scare campaign about COVID, many people have been happy to surrender their human rights, to give up their freedoms, and to be locked down. And because they've been scared witless. The government has also borrowed more money than anywhere else in the world per capita, and was paying people like I think it was the equivalent of so it's that 750 Australian dollars. That's what about just roughly probably $600 a week to stay at home and not work. And many people found that they were actually being paid more for being not allowed to work than they were when actually working. So these people were having a great time of it. But of course, we've run the national debt up into a tremendous amount. And these lockdowns have just been more and more draconian. And people's freedoms, we've seen the small business community absolutely decimated with their businesses closed. So there's been so gross inequity between what's happened between different groups in our society. Originally, they told us the song, we're all in this together. But what you found, those that were working for the government and for big companies, actually many of them have done better off during these lockdowns because they could work from home and wouldn't have to travel to the office. But those in small business and individual enterprise have really copped it hard and have really, like many of them have lost everything.
Yes. So finally, the end of September, we saw a lot of protests, mainly in Melbourne, but also in Sydney, and it became very violent. We had the same thing in Holland happening in March, and if you look at the seasons, it's quite comparable actually.
Look, the police violence that I don't know if you've been able to see many of the videos, but the police violence against citizens protesting against government policy. Right? That's all they were doing. They were protesting against the government policy. Imagine if you'd been locked up and your kids can't go to school for months on end. You have no income for months on end because you haven't got a job. Your business is being locked down. Of course, you want to get out and protest against the government. But what we saw was the most violent oppression of protesters that I've ever seen in my life in this country. I've travelled throughout the world and I have never seen violence so bad against citizens. We have seen police in this country, and I was someone that always held the greatest respect for police. And if there was the benefit of the doubt, I used to always support the police. You didn't see the full thing. You've got to support the police because they're there to protect the people from the villains. In this case, the police are protecting a crooked and rotten government from the people. And what they've done, there's videos of police officers stomping on people's heads. There's a video of a police officer taking his rifle, turning it upside down and spearing it into someone's spine. And the person's actually laying on the ground, putting their hands behind the back. And what was their crime? Protesting against the government. We've even had the police in Victoria opening fire on unarmed crowds with rubber bullets. And not people that were, okay, under what circumstances could police fire rubber bullets? Well, maybe where there's a direct threat to property or life. These people were fleeing, they were running, and they were shot in the back.
It
just
is. It
incredible.
is amazing.
Could you imagine a police force that opens fire not only on unarmed protesters, but on unarmed protesters that are running from them in a public park?
Yes. So
and they're just trying.
this is
And open
clearly
it's
done.
just, yeah.
This is clearly done to intimidate and to give the message: do not think of repeating the protest against the lockdown
Yes.
again.
Yes, it's just shocking scene. It's a scene that there's scenes that embarrass us as Australians. How can we, we've always thought we stand up for human rights around the world, and we criticise other nations that abuse people's human rights. How can we do that going forward? How can we as a nation go and criticise another nation or someone in China for abusing people's human rights? Where you've seen these abuses of human rights on our own streets to our own people, sanctioned by our own governments.
Yeah, it makes all the speech about human rights violations in Belarus or North Korea or China or Russia, for that instance, meaningless.
Yes, yeah. It's very sad time for our nation.
This, I think, is a new standard of hypocrisy. The speech your prime minister gave at the United Nations, and there has been a clip going viral with all the police brutality on the background during his speech. It is phenomenal. This is another level of hypocrisy.
Look, I know people have seen that. It's our prime minister talking about how we as Australians stand up for human rights and believe in individual freedoms. He's saying that in the UN, and at home in his very country, our freedoms and individual rights are being trampled on. Human rights are being suppressed. The hypocrisy, it was just one of the worst Hippocratic speeches I think I've ever seen from any prime minister. It was the exact opposite of what was happening. How anyone could advise him to make that speech at that time was just amazing. It questions if he actually understands what's going on in his own country. We've also had our prime minister. He's been on saying, there'll be no vaccine passports, none of our country, no vaccine passports, time after again. And yet, on Friday, where millions of workers in the state of Victoria are facing unemployment and sacking from their jobs unless they've agreed to join this global medical experiment. And the prime minister just sits back and goes, nothing to do with me.
Yeah, it is amazing. I urge people to watch this clip.
Yes.
Baffling, but there's a lot of talk, and this is also very similar what happened in the United States and in Europe. There's a lot of talk. If you go, I took this from Amnesty International, the website, Human Rights in Australia, and this is what they write about.
Yes, yeah. Look, we have an Indigenous population here in Australia. We call them our Aboriginal population, Indigenous Australians. They're probably one of the oldest known civilizations in the world. And they also have, remember, our country's only 200 years old. So, and these were people who were isolated from the rest of the world for many, many centuries. Yeah. So we had an enormous job to integrate our Indigenous Australians into the mainstream society. And we haven't got everything right. We've done a lot of things poorly by the Indigenous Australians. I think all Australians have. You're playing this now.
Yes, this is the clip, I think.
Yes. He's strangling the woman. It's a police officer. And that was because she didn't wear a mask.
Spraying with...
That's an old lady laying on the ground. That's it. Yes. This girl was arrested in a home for a Facebook post. They still see it. They stomp on his head.
This is
where they open fire on unarmed people. That's the rubber bullets being fired.
Yeah, it is difficult to watch, and it's insane. It is insane.
That's unfortunately where we are. It's as though the whole and what was very surprising, those scenes that you had to that video, they weren't the worst. There were many other scenes that were a lot worse. And what it wasn't only the video, the mainstream media censored it all. So anyone that wasn't sort of watching, as you said, the new alternate media and people's independent journalists that were putting up their own blog site and website, you didn't see that stuff. In fact, one of the main media outlets in this country, what they did, the way they described police firing rubber bullets into unarmed protesters, unprecedented in our nation's history. They just described it. The police took action. They used the words "took action," and that's all they reported. They failed to report the fact about the opening fire of rubber bullets, which for most Australians would just be something incomprehensible. It's something that we would think would happen, like in South America, in Venezuela, or places where there are military coups that have gone on, not in a free and peaceful democratic nation like Australia. And yet the media, the mainstream media, censored it all. They just refused to talk about it.
We have to be honest. Is it a free and democratic nation, or is there a military coup going on?
Well, I think there's been a coup of the medical bureaucrats. The medical bureaucrats have effectively taken over control of a policy. Many of our state parliaments were suspended on the advice of the medical bureaucrats. And because they were basically governing by dictate, no one was able to question them. Any medical doctor in Australia that speaks against these medical bureaucrats and thinks that has it wrong is struck off and denied the right to practice medicine. I remember someone that's a doctor's probably spent 10 plus years at university and dozen years in study and set up their practice, and now they're told if you don't toe the line, or if you even question what we medical bureaucrats, what we health bureaucrats do, you'll be struck off, won't be able to do it. It's been a coup of the medical bureaucrats that have taken over and are dictating and are forcing things. And it's been a lot of weak and cowardly and spineless politicians that haven't stood up to them and thinks that they can get some short-term popularity by looking tough and telling we're keeping you safe. And and when you look at our mortality data, our excess mortality data, we've got record excess mortality this year. So our death rate is well above where it should be. And that's the first 6 months this year. We had 0 COVID deaths. So they're not keeping us safe. It's the exact opposite of what's happening. So these people have to be held to account. There's a lot of court cases going on at the moment, but they have their difficulties. The only way I'm going to fix this is through the policy. And that's why I've decided to run the United Australia Party, where we can make a real change at the next election, which is due sometime before May next year.
Okay, that is some hopeful news, but we have seen irregularities, to say it euphemistically, at the elections now in US, in Canada, in Germany, in Holland. Do you feel you will get a fair chance?
Look, I do, but it's a surprise. Remember, we had the Dominion voting machines in the US and the big question about the Dominion voting machines. Our parliament, in a report they did, I think about 2 years ago, recommended that our electoral commission use Dominion voting machines. It's written there in the parliamentary report. We recommend that they should use Dominion voting machines. It's just, look, we are a bit lucky. The way we count the ballots in this country is much, much more secure what happens in the US. I look at the way, so for example, the lack of security over what happens to those ballot papers in the USA is just amazing. So, for example, we have everyone votes in Australia at effectively a school hall or a local community hall. And each, they call them electoral booths, would have anywhere between 1,000 and maybe 3,000 3,000 voters. Some of the ones in the country have smaller. And those votes are counted in that booth on the night. So scrutineers can come in there. Like I've seen the scrutineers in America, they're in tables, they're in chairs, like 20 yards away from where they can see anything. Our scrutineers are allowed to basically stand up, lean over the table, they're not allowed to touch anything, and they can look at the votes as the votes are being counted. And our votes are counted by hand, not by sort of some machine where who knows how the machine's counting the numbers. So I'm confident we will have a lot of scrutineers at the next election. And it just shows that we need to, people say, have all your voting online and things like that. I'm sorry, I like the old-fashioned way where you get a pen, you get a piece of paper, and you mark it. It goes into that ballot box, and at the end of the day, they pull the ballot box out, and there's full transparency all the way through. I think we should rule out this idea of all this electronic voting, and it goes into sort of cyberspace, and who knows what manipulations it's able to do. Even if there are, it's not manipulated. You've got to have confidence in your election process, and you've got to have that transparency. And thankfully, with that, if our elections are run as they have been in the past with the counting, there's a few things on the margins that need to be improved, such as voter identification when someone goes to an electoral booth. But look, our system is thankfully far, far superior to the joke that we saw in America. To think that that's how they run their elections for the largest democracy in the world that prides themselves, to think that's how they count votes and do things was I just think it's just, it's almost unbelievable.
If I can give you a little bit of advice, because we have a very similar voting system to Australia. So what happened in Holland is, one, media and social media, an interference from foreign entities, so to say. Then
yes.
Mail-in ballots. They changed it right before and even during the election, they changed the rules. The third, the votes were not counted at the local bureau, but they took it to a counting location, and they also changed last moment.
Instead of unmarked vehicles or something, who knows what switcheroos they could do with the ballot boxes on the way. Yes,
exactly. So something that is also happening all over the world is Extinction Rebellion protests, and they don't even make a secret of it that it is being paid with foreign money. I took this from the Australian Extinction Rebellion website. They are very active.
Look, unfortunately, these people are. I talked to some of these people, so like the lights are on, but nobody's home. Look, the reality is, Australia is we're an exporting nation. We export a lot of our raw materials, including coal and natural gas, to China, and that is the source of our wealth. Now, irrespective of whatever position someone comes into the argument on, whether we can change the weather and whether we can give ourselves better weather by doing certain things, the reality is that China is continuing to expand and grow. And whatever, China are building coal-fired power stations in their hundreds and will continue to do so, and continuing to using more coal and more gas. So all we are doing here in Australia is listening to these Extinction Rebellion people. We are handing our nation's competitive advantage to the communist Chinese. So we are making ourselves weaker vis-a-vis the communist Chinese, who we're making stronger. Now, this is in our part of the world is insanity. We've got a communist China turning atolls in the South China Sea into military bases to effectively what a sort of stationary aircraft carriers, turning coral atolls, militarizing them. If you look at what they call their 9-dash line, which goes basically, covers the coast of Vietnam, down to Malaysia, across the top of Indonesia and the Philippines, that's what they believe is Chinese territory. So we have an expansionist communist regime on our northern doorstep that these people want to hand to them a economic political, and military advantage. It is just beyond insanity.
Absolutely. So then we go to one of your partners. Of course, if you push back against the system, against the regime, they will try to cut you down. Can you explain what happened here?
Yeah, sure. Look, Clive Palmer is one of Australia's leading businessmen, and he's been the driving force behind the United Australia Party. He gives very generously to that party, and he gives us the opportunity to compete on a level playing field against the major political parties. So the two major political parties, they actually get something like $100 million of taxpayers' money to run the election campaign. They've gamed the system that makes it almost impossible for a third party to come up and compete against them because of the resources that they give themselves from the taxpayer. Plus they get all the large corporate donations. So I'm working closely with Clive. He's supporting us. He's now the chairman of the United Australia Party. I'm the leader. We're working together to try and give Australia an alternate voice. And because of that, the media and the mainstream parties and the rest of the political system run basically a hit job on Clive because they're frightened that what we're doing might take away some of their power.
Exactly. So when you're successful, they will try to get you. And this is also, in that sense, a big compliment for your movement.
Yes, yeah. Oh, look, the attacks that we come under and the pressure that we come under, the abuse and things that we do in the mainstream media is just a point. But look, we'll wear all that with a badge of honour. It shows that we've got them worried, we've got them frightened. And I'm hopeful that we're already now, by the way, we already now have more members in our party than the two major parties do. So we're now, by membership, the largest political party in this nation. So we're going to give this next election a real crack.
Nice. So this shows probably what is behind the whole machinery of the coup, buying politicians. Just a few days ago, the Austrian chancellor, the prime minister, had to resign, and now they're taking away his political immunity to look into the corruption. Gladys has stepped down, allegedly for something as trivial as a sports subsidy of 9 years ago. Clive said something else. What's your take on this?
Well, firstly, this woman here in this picture, she was the Premier of New South Wales. So where we have the Prime Minister of Australia, we have our different states. So similar to probably the governor of a particular state in the US. Okay. She made some of the most despicable and disgusting comments I've heard from any Australian politician. She stood up before the national media and said, I don't want to be around an unvaccinated person. And she said, I don't want the vaccinated mixing with the unvaccinated. She drove division in our society like no other politician has done in this nation. She has turned Australian against Australian. She was, I just think, absolutely despicable conduct. Now, what was happening, as you said there, she stepped aside. Okay, she at the time she was being investigated by, we have an independent, in use the state, so it's called ICAC, which stands for Independent Commission Against Corruption, which investigates politicians' misdoings. Now, she's been investigated. We don't know the full details of what it is, but if you're investigated by these bodies and you think you are innocent, you stand aside and you say, I'm going to fight this and I'm going to prove I'm innocent. She didn't do that. She just walked away and resigned. Right? Now, one of the things, the allegations that she's doing, was she had a boyfriend that she gave $4 million worth of taxpayers' money to do some special shooting or sporting club, his electorate, to help him. Now, imagine if the boot was on the other foot. Imagine if a male politician had given $4 million of taxpayers' money to their girlfriend, who was another member of politics, who used that money to try and get herself elected and do electoral favours. It would be all over the front pages of the world's press. But this woman so far has gotten away with it, but her day is coming. She has to appear before this independent commission, I think, in about 2 weeks' time, and we'll be watching that with great interest, because if she was really innocent, Now, if you're innocent, why wouldn't you stay and fight? Why would you just walk away?
I think the people who bought her thought she was a liability and said, step out of the limelight, we will put another minion in.
It'll be interesting to see where this goes, sort of thing. But you know, I just thought the comments that she made, I will never ever forgive her for those comments, because we've had suicides of young people that didn't want to get injected with the substance because they'd been abused and harassed by their friends. We've had families split up because of fights over these breakdowns. We've had people abusing people in the streets. We've had what's sanctioned all that violence that we've seen by the police is because they think these vaccinated people that have decided not to get vaccinated for whatever reason are somehow dirty and unclean. Right? And she's the one that has spread that message, which is a complete and utter falsehood. It is contrary to the science, it's contrary to the evidence, but she was spewing this rubbish day after day after day. So if there's a thing called karma, it's waiting for her at this independent commission against corruption.
Actually, what she did is considered a crime against humanity. It reminds me of the radio show that aired in Rwanda in the beginning of the 90s, and people can look it up, what happened after that. So, a final question or topic, the mandates. You said Scott Morrison has constantly refused that there will be a mandate, that there will be a vaccination passport, yet we are getting there.
Well, just for example, in my home state of New South Wales, only the vaccinated can go to the barber or to the hairdressers. So if you're unvaccinated, you're not allowed to go to the barber shop to get a haircut. Right? You can go everyone can go to a supermarket to buy food, but to a department store. So what's some of your big department stores there? Is it Careful or something like that? Everyone can go to there, or to a Sainsbury's or a Tesco. Everyone can go to those shops, but the ones that sell like general merchandise, like a big department store or a clothing store, you can't go into. So you can go into a coffee shop, and if you're vaccinated, you're allowed to sit down in the coffee shop. But if you're unvaccinated, you've got to go, and it is medical apartheid that we have. That's in New South Wales.
Yeah.
Now in Victoria,
same in Holland.
In Victoria, we have medical fascism, because in Victoria, there's about 1 million jobs in that state they've listed that unless you are injected, you are sacked. So what we're going to see this absolutely damaging to the economy across all the police forces, retail workers, across thousands and thousands of jobs. People in Victoria say, look, are going to be sacked en masse next week because they've decided, for whatever reason, which should be their own human right. Now that is a violation of all the international treaties that we have signed on human rights. It's a violation of our own human rights provisions. You cannot use coercion, and this is more than coercion. This is blackmail and extortion that is being used to force people to participate in a medical experiment that they inject themselves with a substance that has zero long-term safety data. You shouldn't be forced. You should not be forced as a free citizen in a free country, and everything that we've fought for over the last century to protect those freedoms is that you cannot be coerced into a medical intervention against your free will. Now we're abandoning all those principles, and we're giving them not only just any medical intervention. I said it is an experimental medical intervention.
Absolutely, and that's why we're fighting so many court cases, and we see this happening all over the world. There are some glimmers of hope. If we look at Italy, for instance, this weekend, because at the 15th, those mandates kicked into effect, we see all the harbors and roads being blocked by the harbor workers, by the truckers. The people are now massively standing up, and we even get that protest covered on the news, and this is the first time because they kept it out of the news completely, and now we have our mainstream media, so there is something happening.
Well, that's fantastic to hear. There were big protests in a couple of Australian cities that were allowed to protest. Remember, most of the cities, the main cities, Sydney and Melbourne, you're not allowed to go out and protest against the government. But I know there was a big protest today in Perth. There was another big protest in Adelaide. I've seen some of the pictures of those. I think more and more people are waking up that this is not just about COVID. This is about our freedoms and whether we want to live in a free society. For how our kids and our grandkids, what sort of country and society and world that we want to leave those people. And that's why many people that have, it's not about being pro-vaccine or against the vaccine, or you've been vaccinated and I've been vaccinated. It's about whether you believe in freedom of choice and whether you believe in freedoms that, fortunately for our generation, were our birthrights, but they never came for the freedom that you got as our birthright. They didn't come for free. They became because our forefathers sacrificed their lives fighting against all sorts of totalitarian regimes and standing up for freedoms. And hundreds of thousands and millions of lives lost to give us the freedoms that we have. And we're watching them vanish before our own eyes. That's what people are waking up to. And that's why people are taking to the streets and protesting, and good on them to do so. We've got to stand up. We've got to protect those freedoms, and we've got to pass them on. The birthrights that we have, we've got to pass them on to our kids and our grandkids to make sure that they enjoy the same free society that we've had up until now.
Thank you very much, Greg. It was an amazing last few words. Thank you for being the fighter that you are. We wish you a lot of luck. And of course, we want to have you back on the show and keep us informed about what is happening in Australia. And of course, what is happening with your campaign, because there is a special time between the Netherlands and Australia. And I think a lot of ex-Dutch people or the Dutch people that live in Australia should support you. I have some family in Sydney and I will inform them to vote for you.
This is also a global struggle as well. You face the same issues in Europe as we do here in Australia, that they see in the US and Canada. It's a global struggle. The countries that have led the path of freedom for the last century are now the countries that are most under attack. And we've got to unite like we did through other times throughout our history and fight back and push against this and stand up for those beliefs and freedom that we have.
Thank you very much, Greg.
Great to be with you again.